Hi everybody, my name is Jim Hemphill. I write about filmmaking for IndieWire, and I'm so excited to bring up our panel tonight. We've got a great group of filmmakers, starting with composer David Fleming. Editor and executive producer Paul Crowder. Producer Margaret Bodde. And director Ron Howard.
Duet.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Woo! So one of the things I love about this movie is your love and admiration that you all feel for Jim Henson is so obvious. It really comes through in the movie. And I'm kind of curious, I guess my first question is just, for each of you, what was your relationship to Henson and his work coming into this? Were you fans, or was it something that you grew to love over the course of making this movie?
Yeah, I wasn't sure.
No. Sesame Street is so deeply ingrained in my psyche. I think I was, accidentally brainwashed by my parents the first couple of years. So that would be the main one, but Muppets, of course.
Without a doubt. I mean, I think we all grew up learning to count and learning to spell using the Muppets. I certainly did. And I have those long memories of those songs that are all the counting songs, so it was huge. And the Muppets were just, when I was a teenager, just right on my comedy, like funny bone all the time, so they were fantastic without doubt.
Same. Big fan, super, like, obsessed with Sesame Street, and especially all the films. And I didn't know it at the time. I wasn't thinking like, oh, Jim Henson made all these films, but like all of the interstitials and the counting films, and the two little girls, and the King of Eight. Just so totally big fan.
I'm a little older than these guys, so for me, I now recognize that it was Jimmy Dean and Rolf that was the first Jim Henson character that I was aware of, but I had no idea it was Jim Henson. And then along came Sesame Street, and that was incredible to me. But now I'm starting to raise kids, so they're tiny, they're little, and I realized that I was engrossed by those films, and I by then Jim was beginning to be famous, and I knew there was this Jim Henson and Muppets, and that were amazing, Big Bird, and all the Kermit. But what would happen is I would be walking around, and I would see one of these counting films, and I would get engrossed in Sesame Street and admire it, and then sit down with Bryce and watch and get caught up in Sesame Street. And it wasn't until I was working on this that I realized that not only did he contribute to puppets, but of course he's helped design this aesthetic. And what really blew me away as we were working on the film was that this was the result of all of this experimentation from the time he was a teenager. And that sense of humor, and that experimental sort of visual sense, and all of that stuff was informing Sesame Street. And then of course, the Muppets were, an amazing phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me that was one of the great things about this documentary is even as a fan of Jim Henson, it really made me aware of what a great filmmaker he was. I always thought he was like a performer and a puppeteer, maybe a writer, but it's like realizing what a great director he was. I'm curious, what were the origins of this documentary? How did it come to you, and what was the starting point?
Well, Justin Wilkes, who's president at Imagine, Sarah Bernstein, who runs documentaries, came to me 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, and basically said, the Henson family they're reluctant to turn over their archives and cooperate, and yet their word is that they're beginning to believe maybe now is the time to really do a comprehensive documentary, and they're interested in talking to people. Would you want to talk to them? And I certainly thought that would be great. I've loved what's happened with Imagine and documentary filmmaking. I've enjoyed it for myself. I think it's not only exciting, I think it informs my scripted work, and in important ways, work with Paul a lot on various projects, and it's exciting. So yeah, I went in, but I had no idea really what would the feature story be. You know, I just knew it was incredible. I knew my friend George Lucas characterized him as a bona fide creative genius, and so I had a lot of admiration. But as soon as we started seeing the archives, and I was talking to the family, I recognized there were like 3 levels on which this film could work. We could celebrate the stuff that we knew. We could discover all this stuff that was sort of the foundation of it and more, and the ups and downs sort of in terms of what succeeded and what didn't and what that meant to him. But then there was this family story underneath it. And of course, that's always a subject that interests me, behind the scenes, behind the world of people who get a lot done on a human level. What does it mean? How does that reverberate? And when I realized they were frank and open and interested, and yet very, very loving. I just felt like there was a chance to really offer audiences some real insight beyond celebrating, you know, all the great stuff, which was worthy in and of itself.
So Margaret, at what point did you come on board, and what about this appealed to you?
I came on board, I would say about 2 years ago now. It was maybe like March or April of 2022.
Yeah, it's like COVID.
And I had worked with Ron and Justin and Sarah on a documentary about David Johansen. Thank you, we love it. And we just really enjoyed working together, and you know, it was just conversations about other projects. And when Justin asked me about this, you know, I just was like, that would just be amazing. I mean, the idea of a documentary about Jim Henson, directed by Ron, and you know, just working with that team again was really enticing. And one of the things that was so cool was just and really exciting was when we went to LA and we were with Lisa and Brian Henson, and they were screening all this early film, this really early archive, and it had been so well restored, and it was just so entertaining. And Ron, I remember you were just, it was starting to be really clear that you wanted to take what Jim had created and let that inform the style of the film. And you know, that was just, I think, always very at the forefront of your thinking about it, seemed like, you know.
Yeah, well, that's true. And I first of all, I was just laughing my way through all of this, but I was also fascinated by his experimental films, his own journey through his brain. I'm an idea man, you know. I mean, that's kind of where the title came from. But also, of course, timepiece. And I recognized that, of course, you know, there's a paradox at work. He's playful, he's joyful, he loves life, he's an optimist, all these things, and yet he feels this anxiety, this battle against time, which he reflects in his film. But he lived it, you know, he lived it. And so I felt like here's a film that could be both optimistic and yet you know, also utterly human, and revealing in really interesting ways. And you know, and the family, you know, they were willing to trust us with this. Last night on a panel, Brian said that after our conversations, they said, "Oh, he reminds us of Dad. Let's have him." Which was, of course, supreme flattery.
Well, that point you made about like kind of the way this movie is, it's, you know, it's hopeful and it's idealistic, but also very realistic and not overly sentimentalized. I mean, that's another thing I really liked about it. And I'm curious, in terms of the score, how does that kind of writing that line inform your approach to the music? Yeah, it was, you know, Ron brought up timepiece before, and I think that was like a really interesting sort of clue into how to approach this, because, you know, as Ron alluded, he sort of was really an experimental filmmaker, but that piece, and specifically kind of how Ron and Paul have kind of framed it, sort of shows how obsessed with time he was and how much he wanted to get done. So for me, what was interesting really is how to try to express, like, that kind of march, that battle against time, and the clock is always ticking for him. But then there's also, there's these moments where he, especially when he confronts mortality, where we kind of, pull the rug out and stop time and stop the clock. So it really became about like, when do we show how he's dealing with that? Because he really is, this mix of ambition and wanting to get everything done, and then there's this sort of like quiet spirit at the center of it. So with the music, it was always focusing on what part of Jim is coming out right now. Is this the spiritual side of him, or is this the driven side? And driven by playfulness and joy, which is also the interesting thing about him, I think. So many of these types of stories of these types of guys are driven aggressively, and he's driven by playfulness. So that was something I always wanted to tap into.
I just also gotta say, what an ambitious score for a documentary, because there were so many. They really came through, but the thing about documentaries, unlike scripted, as you all know, is that it's this ongoing evolution. Like right up until maybe a month or 6 weeks ago, we were still getting photographs and ideas and little bits of sound and things that we could use and some tracks. And one of the things that was so important to all of us was Jane's presence in the film, and she was so reticent about being interviewed that it was really a challenge. And very late in the game, we got some photographs actually from Lisa Henson that she had taken as a teenager that she found, and it was very helpful. But one of the last things that you did was actually a sort of a Jim and Jane idea that wound up, to me, it just elevated, everything. So there were so many dimensions in what you had to do.
Well, I think Jane's part of the story was for me the most surprising. I think Jim is so interesting because everyone obviously has seen so much of his work, and in some ways it seems like we know him through that work. And I think in some ways that is correct, that there is so much of him in that. But then there's also all these things that were completely surprising to me, and I think his relationship with his wife was sort of paramount there. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that kind of snuck up on me watching the movie when it ends up becoming as much about that as it is. And Paul, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the evolution of that, because Ron kind of alluded to the fact that it was something that was maybe discovered a little later in the game, how important that relationship was to the movie.
But without a doubt, I think Ron was always pushing for it. That was always the thing that Ron was asking for, was like, can we get more Jane? Can we get a little deeper? Can we always find the deeper thing? Because there was so much fun stuff to be had. There's so much playful things that you can do, but where we all connect is those emotional stories where we can all relate because we can relate to something that's similar in our lives. So it was trying to find those moments. The most difficult thing about the Jane situation, as Ron has said, she didn't do many interviews, that the quality of the audio that we had was so poor because they were done for books or articles, so they were on the dictaphone on the coffee table. There was no close miking. What became to our advantage was this the AI side of things, where they were able to clean this stuff up in the last 3-4 months beyond anything we'd heard throughout. Every time we were playing back the film, that was always the tricky part. It was like, can we get Jane now there? How can we make sure she doesn't get lost? So then suddenly the technology came on that side, and that was really, really helpful in being able to use more of her interview. And then we found there was one more interview came up very late, and suddenly kicked in a bit more stuff. These photographs came in, and when Jane's final edit, like right in the end that Sierra and I did, where we got Jane figured in a lot bigger, and suddenly she was just that little bit extra, it made all the difference. And it was suddenly, we all had the same reaction. It's like, oh my God, here we are. This is what we've been missing. This is the bit of the film that's been missing that we really, really needed. So it was incredible. Yeah, it was great.
Well, you mentioned, Ron, that a documentary is constantly evolving and the shape is constantly changing. Where do you begin? I mean, do you start with the interviews? Do you start digging through archival footage? Are you kind of doing it all at once? What's the starting point of the actual filmmaking process?
Well, it's kind of all at once, and there's a lot of research done. And Mark Monroe is a writer for a reason, you know, because he goes through that, and yeah. It's not like writing a script, but it is helping guide a narrative, and which influences the questions that we would begin to ask. So a lot of that work goes on before you sort of invest the time and money and energy in interviews, and so that was very important here. But the thing that I've had to learn, that all the documentary veterans, they kind of make fun of me because always about halfway through I'm saying, "Is there what? Is it?" And they're just like, we're fine, we're doing what we need to do, and it is collecting these from the archives, from the interviews, these buckets, and then figuring out, how the structure is going to work, where the cause and effect is, and the narrative push. And I'm so used to that sort of being in place from the beginning because there's a screenplay you followed and you've shot it for those reasons. But one of the things that I really have also come to appreciate about the doc world and the discipline of it is it's a slightly different relationship with an audience. I mean, you always want to hold people's attention and be engrossing, but with scripted, it is more sit down and tell a story, transport people, use cinema in a way. It's a little more theatrical. I mean, in a way, it's artifice, and maybe the effect is to feel dramatically like it's real, and but we all know this is something that's totally controlled and made, and audiences expect to be really taken on a ride and just show me and let me hear, what have you got? With documentaries, they're there because they intellectually they want to understand, and with movies, that can be a value, it can even be an entertainment value, but first and foremost they want this diversion, they want to go on a journey. When you're talking to a documentary audience and you're working for them, it's really what can you tell me? What can I learn from this? And please make it as entertaining as you possibly can. Sure, but it's a different kind of relationship with the audience, and I've really enjoyed understanding those differences. And again, as I say, I understand why Margaret's worked with many times, or Spike Lee, or Jonathan Demme, or others who move back and forth between these disciplines. Like Marty says, they're all films, Dan. And I'm beginning to understand why he says that, but it's definitely very enriching and exciting. I'm really grateful that I've kind of found this, and this is something that I can, especially with the support of Imagine, can continue finding subjects that are interesting along with what I do on the scripted side.
And I will say Marty talks a lot about what you were talking about, how the working in nonfiction and documentary really has just fueled his narrative work. And when you're doing interviews with real people, right? And you see and you pick up, and even looking at archive of how people interact and behave, and it kind of then helps you work with an actor to create a performance, and work with writers to get that dialogue right. So I think it seems natural that you should be able to go. The thing that is a stumbling block for some filmmakers is just working with so much archive, right, and having to put a film together with so many disparate pieces of material, and to build a film, you're really building a film. I think that's a puzzle.
Well, it's really fascinating to try to get ideas across in a documentary, especially one that's not narrated. When in a movie you'd have somebody say the line, or
Well, that's what I love about you. You describe it in that way. You bring it so like if we were doing the movie now, I'd shoot a scene that says this. So how do we create that scene that does this, and then we figure out how we're going to do that.
Well, he's a master at this because he'll take a few still photographs and another thing and a voiceover, and suddenly you almost feel like there's a scene going on between the characters, and it's always I get a huge kick out of it when Paul works that.
No, I mean, but that was what was wonderful about having this film and having Jim's early work as an influence for us. And one of the very first things that we did was cut scene about the children that is on the cutting room floor, sadly. But what that did was it informed us a lot about how we could creatively do this film. And I just remember them reading the dialogue in the transcript from Cheryl saying, my mum had 4 kids in 5 years, and all I heard in my head was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I built the scene with that. When she said that, and then we did the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 4 siblings. So,
and it was my favorite thing, and just like movies, but eventually we had to cut it.
ended up on the floor. But that gave us the lead, so Sierra and I ran with that. That was like, when we realised that was working, that's how we sort of worked with it. And then Frank was brilliant with his interview, and he was into doing the stop motion stuff.
Yes, I just said at the end of his interview, I said, well, I was toying around with doing some stop motion, and we were gonna have you walk to your chair, but maybe any kind of like finish my sentence. Stop motion? And we just put the camera up high, and he knew exactly how to do that. And it was, again, and he told us that this was gonna be a way into, or a way to kind of keep Jim's voice and sensibility active in the movie, even when we didn't have him speaking to us.
Right, exactly. That really did. That stop motion idea, the whole being in the queue, it just was one thing after another that was just felt so Jim, that we have all these wonderful elements and our palette to play with visually and comedically, if we want, or in any way, to be able to tell this story. So that was great fun, really.
And when we were doing, I think when we were doing the Frank interview, we also built that door. It's a Sesame Street door.
Right.
It's from one of the films. And, at first we were gonna open up the door and reveal the interview subjects. You kind of were playing around with, how these motifs or devices could be kind of used in the film, but, kind of, again, just channeling that inventiveness and the playfulness of Jim.
Yeah, we weren't sure exactly how this would work, but let's just keep trying things. And the things that stuff we went with, and sadly some things ended up on the floor. But it was a great place to be coming from.
Well, the approach to shooting the interviews was great, I thought. I thought that was a way of keeping the movie it does have a sort of Jim Henson spirit to it, and you're keeping him in the viewer's mind with the things you're projecting. And how did the idea for that whole setting and way of shooting the interviews come about?
I wish it was my idea, but I don't remember who was it.
It was Justin's.
Justin
Yeah,
Rose.
it was Justin's. Yeah, we were trying to figure out. It seemed like it would be kind of weird to have interviews of people in situ. Like if they were just in your office, or if you were shooting them in different locations. And we were trying to figure out a way to kind of create a space.
Right.
And Justin was like, well, Jim made this film, The Cube, and he sent this picture around. Everyone got a text of this cube, and it was like, wow, that's
Also a very practical idea, because it's just 3 walls, you can take the cube anywhere you want to.
It was very expensive to ship a cube across the country. We ended up building it in LA rather than shipping it.
Yeah, but then that gave us another layer of things. Well, maybe we can put stuff on the cube.
Right.
Stuff.
It almost looks like a bunch of televisions.
Yeah, and that gave us another level. So that was just like, wow, even more fun. And the cube could be a magical place, because if you watch the actual cube thing, it was this place where anything could happen. So we ran with that. Anything could be in this room. They can disappear, things can show up. So that's how we got into all that stuff.
Well, I want to touch on a point that Margaret made, which was just about the sheer volume of archival footage that you're dealing with on something like this. To me, it's like I look at this and I think about, you've got however many decades of work that Henson's done. You've got decades of stuff coming from his family's archives. Where do you even begin deciding what the guiding principles are for what you're going to use and what you're going to leave out?
For a while, I was saying, couldn't this be a series, really? Because there's just so many great. Sorry. But I encourage you all to just go find these Muppet Show episodes. They're hilarious. There's so many jokes. So many jokes. Relationships on the music side. That Jim was very musical, but this, the relationship with the songwriting teams and so forth. But the interviews did begin to give us a nice narrative shape. The early interviews really were kind of promising and exciting, weren't they?
Yeah, without a doubt. Frank led it off really well, and then the kids.
Yeah. and Frank was the first interview, and he did, because he was really the collaborator. I mean, he and Jim had such a unique partnership, creative relationship, and they were both directors and performers. I mean, they shared a lot of, things in common, and he came, the greatest guy, by the way, and he had so much respect for Ron, and you guys had, worked together, known each other, and he just, you could tell, when someone's ready to just kind of like, I'm doing this, I'm doing this interview, I'm gonna give
He
you.
wanted to do right by Jim,
Yeah.
And everybody did. And you asked earlier about the kind of, what was it like working on the film and all of, and it was demanding, because there was so much to work through, and yet this is one of those projects where just everyone, our animation group, I mean, it just everybody involved.
Green Novelties did the Kermit, the Dark Crystal. They're awesome. I don't know if anyone's here, but they're.
It was just energizing, and when you talk to people who worked for Jim, they said, well, we worked all those hours, and he never had to bludgeon us into it. First of all, he tried to make it fun, and it mostly was, but second of all, we're just following his lead. And I think that energy and that spirit infused this project. Everyone wanted to get it right. Everyone bent over backwards to do what they could. The folks at Disney were very, very supportive and encouraging as well. Execs really liking what we were showing them and encouraging us to do more and go further. And it was exciting in those ways.
But a lot of pressure, because what all these people will account to, they love Jim, they love his work, and you have to do right by him. So there's also always constantly aware of this has got to be good enough.
Well, my second documentary, which Paul edited, was about the Vidiots. It was I jumped into this feeling like this would be fascinating, and loving the fact that the Beatle family and McCartney and Ringo were willing to have me do it and so forth. And then it got out online that I was doing it, and there was this kind of onslaught of of feedback, and it wasn't like overtly aggressive. It was kind of like, don't fuck this up. Kind of the subtext. And I felt almost the same kind of pressure and work out that we were doing Jim Henson, and I just realized how important it was to get it right. And of course I also wanted to get it right on behalf of the family, because look, it's a family of filmmakers and directors, producers, and yet they knew they should not do it, would not do it, and they were great. I mean, they handed it over with there were really no caveats. It was just their trust, and I wanted to live up to that as well.
And you did.
Thank you.
Karen Falk is the Henson archivist. She's amazing. And she's really, every iconic, creator, should have someone that great, because, over the years they've just gathered and preserved and just cared for everything he created, his doodles, his red book, and his, photographs, home movies. There was so much material, and so in the process of starting, the first thing we did was try to just take in as much as we could from their archive. It was a very long process with this immense archive, but there's always more. When you're making a documentary, you just kind of tenacious about there's gonna be things. And very late in the game, we found this photographer, Norman Seed, had shot these photographs of Jim, and with every photo session, he recorded video. And those interviews are very revealing. We didn't have much with Jim that was that kind of intimate,
Right.
And so you never stop looking, all down to when they are, you know, pulling the plug at the finishing houses. You know, you're just always still waiting to make sure you've kind of covered the waterfront as far as archive goes.
But we always had Orson.
Never saw.
You know, Ron, you mentioning that documentaries in a sense are like less theatrical than narrative dramatic film you make. How does that inform the approach to the music? Like, how do you, with you and David, I mean, is there a difference in terms of, because, you know, if you're doing something, if you're doing Far and Away, for example, you can swell up the strings as much as you want. I mean,
I don't know, it's that seems pretty similar. I mean, it's a spotting session, and and I've worked with Dave on unscripted, you know, projects as well. But it's, I would say that's something that's quite similar. And Paul's, you know, very musical and is a musician himself. But I mean, it's that same kind of conversation where you sort of say, you know, all right, let's make some space for music here. This is a place where we're going to want the music to help convey, you know, the point that we're making.
I love the themes that you came up with as well for the film. It was really excellent.
thanks. I mean, I did a documentary series a few years back, Blue Planet, which is just scoring fish, and in a way that was the first clue that you had to treat them the same, because if you start thinking that it's somehow different than any other dramatic story, whether it's scripted or not, then you're going to lose engagement with the natural drama that's unfolding. And I, you know, Jim is the hero of this story, and he's a flawed hero, and he's a complex hero, and I think it deserves the same type of treatment as scripted drama would. Well, I guess to wrap things up, you know, I'm curious as a viewer, you know, I felt like this movie just brought up so many ideas about creativity and, you know, the meaning of life and the meaning of time and all that. And I'm curious for all of you, what did it leave you with? I mean, how were you changed making this movie, or what did you learn from Henson? I should probably take breaks at work. But really, I just, it was so inspiring to sort of see that he created from this really joyful place. I think sometimes when you're on a project, it can be very stressful, and to see the way he sort of transformed his environment into a very positive place of creation was really inspiring to me.
I think he also created a lot of space with his collaborators. It seemed like he really kind of brought out the best. And for me, I kind of felt like my takeaway is like, don't see obstacles, right? If something seems like it's never been done, so maybe try to figure out a way to do it. He didn't ever seem to see limitations to things. And also, especially for you kids out there, make things, right? Like make things that can, that you can just make things. So, woo.
Creativity, always, you know, be as creative as you can, never worry about anything in something. Was just repeating what everyone said, but he's just a very inspiring person, you know, he really was. He's creative in so many different ways, everything from music to visuals to colors to sounds, everything. It was just, you know, an inspiration to us and an inspiration to the film. So I was totally inspired as a kid. I was even more inspired to watch all the work that he did and get to know even more and more work. And it was just an absolutely incredible experience. It really was, as these films can be.
For me, it really reinforced the idea that you just, you know, this is going to be your life's work. You've got to take some risks along the way. And I was a young actor on a TV series that was not very good with Henry Fonda. Henry Fonda was not very good. It was called The Smith Family for a couple of years. And but my dad knew Henry Fonda, and he'd been in Mr. Roberts with him. And I wound up having a really good kind of relationship with Henry Fonda. And he knew I wanted to be a director, and at that point, and I was showing him Super 8 movies and stuff like that. And he said at one point, he said, you know, if you don't feel like you're risking everything about every 18 months or 2 years, you're not really trying. And Jim risked everything, all the time, and he lost a lot. I mean, or it was underwhelming, and he felt the frustration. It wasn't like it was easy for him, but he continued to face that because the joy of reaching and rallying, collaborators to share in that attempt, that journey was that was his life. And of course he wanted everything to succeed, but it wasn't really about outcomes. It was it's a cliche, but it was about the process, and it was about the journey. And so I've tried to live that way and operate that way, but it's so evident in his journey, and then you see the results. And even in some of the projects like Labyrinth and a couple of other things that are didn't really click at the moment in the zeitgeist, but that all of that effort has paid off and meant so much to so many audiences. So it was very inspiring and reinforcing in a lot of ways.
Well, I thought it was a great movie, and as a Jim Henson fan, so thank you all for being